Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland Vintage Roadshow here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network. And this is my monthly podcast here on the crew where, this just gives me an excuse to gush over my favorite films. And joining me for a second time in the past couple months is my good friend Griff. Griff, thank you so much for coming on.
Shane, thank you very much.
Absolutely. And Griff is indeed a lover of classic cinema and also a new member of the movie club over on my YouTube channel, The Wasteland Reviewer. So you could check out our first Griff's first discussion on the movie club with the Matrimaniac from 1916. But we're talking about something much more modern and much more gritty than that movie for sure. Because we're going to be diving into Taxi Driver, which for me personally is my favorite Scorsese film and the first one I'm going to be talking about on this podcast. So a great way to place to start is talk a little bit about Mr. Scorsese then. But Griff, what are your thoughts on Scorsese in terms of like how do you are you a big fan of his? What are some of your favorite films? Stuff like that.
I've been a big fan of Scorsese for a long time. I don't recall the first Scorsese movie that I've seen. I've seen most of his movies. I think my favorite Scorsese movie is actually another one of your favorites, The Departed.
Yeah, it's another great film, but a Boston one, which was an interesting change of pace for him for sure. We'll be talking a little bit about New York films in a minute. But no, The Departed is fantastic as well. And that movie that finally got him his Oscar for Best Director. But no, it was very interesting because I remember the first time I watched a Scorsese film was in high school and was Raging Bull in a cinema class, and I was not a fan. 16-year-old Shane was like, this was just a bunch of Italian guys screaming the F word at each other for 2 hours. It's accurate, but so much more than that. Which is our buddy Joe, Raging Bull's his favorite film. So he's very happy when he found out that I rewatched it and actually really loved it. So Joe can be happy. But I got a whole new appreciation for Scorsese when I covered him on my Welcome to the Wasteland show, where I went through every single one of his films. And for me, as an it felt like I was watching something that I got on another level. And I think that's something special where it's just like I understood like the looming Catholicism of so many of his films, and especially some of his earlier films like Mean Streets, and then obviously he did Silence and Last Temptation of Christ, and films that really delved into that. And it really spoke to me that like I got a lot of like the very Italian American things that he incorporated into his films, including Italian American, that little short documentary that he did with his parents is honestly one of my favorite documentaries because it just felt like I was sitting down with my grandparents.
Yeah.
So many of those stories were relatable, but I think something that I really appreciate about him is just the wide range of different types of projects he did. Unlike most people thinking he just did gangster movies, which is not the case.
Mm-mm.
Not at all. Like, obviously, you have Mean Streets, you have Goodfellas, you have Casino, you have, if you want to put in that, like Gangs in New York, just, period dressing, and The Departed and Irishman, but like, you have films like I'm a humongous fan of his documentary work and The Last Waltz, the concert film with the band is amazing. And I love his documentary about George Harrison that released on HBO in two parts because it's like a beefy 3.5 hour documentary. But so much of his work is just so impressive, and he's one of the all-time greats. And he's doing great things for cinema through preservation. And he's the main reason why I watched The Red Shoes for the first time and absolutely love it. So there you go.
Yeah, and I love it how he's a cheerleader for modern filmmakers,
Mhm.
especially those horror filmmakers like Robert Eggers and
Yeah.
Ty West. But going back to the documentaries, I almost forgot he directed that documentary about Bob Dylan called No Direction Home. That's
Mhm.
definitely a great one, not only for Scorsese fans, but also for Dylan fans too, because it's one of those rare opportunities for you to see Dylan as himself. And I was going through Scorsese's filmography. I didn't know he directed the movie Kundun, the
Yeah.
movie. I think it was about the Dalai Lama, the
Mhm.
early years of him, his family, or something like that.
Yeah, it's part of basically he has a faith-based trilogy of films with Last Temptation of Christ, Kundun, and Silence. And Silence is one of my favorite films from 2016. That movie really blew me away, and it makes me really sad nobody saw it.
Yeah, when I saw it at Hillsborough Cinemas, I think it was the last week it was there, and it was a 10 p.m. show, and it was just me and two other people. I really liked it, and you're right, Shane. It's a shame that it didn't get the attention and the acclaim that it deserved.
Wow, Griff, that was commitment, a 10 p.m. showing for a almost 3 hour
Yeah,
film about.
I think I was working at Hillsborough Cinemas that day, and I got off real. So I'm like, yeah, I would just go see Silence, and this was before the era we're in now, where a movie's in theaters for like 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden, bam, it's on streaming services.
Well, that one was barely in theaters for like 3 weeks because nobody saw it, and then they pushed all the screenings out. But no, it did not wind up on streaming within a couple weeks for people to go check it out. But that was one of my favorite films from that year, and they rushed it because they didn't even release a trailer until October and it was coming out in December. And they tried to squeeze it in for award season. It didn't work out. They should have punted it to next award season and gave it some time to like really build up anticipation.
Hmm.
But alas, it happened.
Yeah.
But Scorsese is one of the best around, and he's still making incredible films. Killers of the Flower Moon, the fact that like an 80-year-old man made that movie is just mind-boggling to me, for sure.
Yeah, Killers of the Flower Moon was good. I also loved Goodfellas and The Irishman. I think The
Mhm.
Irishman was definitely a swan song for that type of movie, that gangster movie, and for him to get De Niro, Pacino,
Mhm.
Pesci, and Keitel all in the same film together, that was a monumental feat.
Yeah. Well, and I I think it's a great film, and I think it's an interesting evolution of his gangster movies where like it finally showed like this is what happens if you don't die young. You
Mhm.
grow old and you're isolated and none of your family's around. That was so sad. Like that just was such a poignant shot at the end with him being in the retirement home all alone, sitting in his room and it just pull him back. But I was actually just having this conversation with Jess, my wife, that I was a little frustrated that they could have made a big opportunity for a young Italian American actor to play a young De Niro, but they decided to DH him and try to make a 80-year-old look like he was stomping somebody.
Yeah.
That's never gonna look good. But Netflix paid him to do it. They gave him all the money to use all that de-aging, so there you go. But thinking about one of the biggest things that Scorsese's attached to are New York films because obviously like Taxi Driver, like you feel the filth of New York City at the time, and we even hear Travis talking about how they just need to wash all of it away. But Griff, what are some of your favorite films that like really like take place in New York and have that as a big piece of it?
Hmm. Well, I would say aside from Taxi Driver, I think another great New York film, it came out in the early 70s, Superfly, which was
Nice.
part of that, so-called blaxploitation era
Mhm.
film. I think that's a film that really captures the essence of New York at that time, the grittiness of it.
Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of those black exploitation films really took advantage of like the Harlem setting and stuff like that. And you really like feel the city as a
Mhm.
part of it. I feel like there's a laundry list of Woody Allen films,
Sure,
obviously, that are like very New York. Because I think the only filmmaker that sensationalizes New York more than Martin Scorsese is Woody Allen. So whether it's like Manhattan or you have plenty of pieces of like Annie Hall in the New York elements, and even somebody like a Noah Baumbach with like films like Francis Ha and even Marriage Story, where New York and LA are such like conflicting essence. And Noah Baumbach's obviously a fan of Woody Allen, so I think that's pretty clear that he channeled a lot of that. I'd even say like The Godfather. Obviously it's a little out of the city, but you still have some of those iconic moments in the city, or The Godfather Part Two, especially
right.
that whole entire assassination of the Don in the city by Vito, where he's like climbing across all of the buildings and everything. It's a excellent use of the city for sure. And there's a lot of films that are able to just leverage that and really use New York as that kind of like love letter kind of setting. Um, there's not a ton of like my favorite movies that are like New York set movies, but I do have a lot of Jersey pride. Love to see more. I love when I find out that movies set in New Jersey. Even watching that new Eddie Murphy, Pete Davidson, The Drop Off, or what the pickup or whatever that was on Amazon. They were
Yeah.
driving down the like Atlantic City Expressway. I'm like, wait a minute. And they're going to a whole bunch of South Jersey places. I'm like, Jersey Pride. I don't like this movie, but Jersey Pride.
Yeah, that's too bad because they're both great and the
Mhm.
story looked good, but I know it got pretty poor reviews.
I'm not blaming Eddie Murphy or Pete Davidson for the movie. So, also, one other New York movie I had to throw out there is Brooklyn. I love that movie so much. And obviously, it's very much about an immigrant coming in and really connecting with her new home of New York City and, falling in love with a good New York paisan named Tony.
Yeah,
Because,
I remember. Yeah, I remember seeing that at Montgomery Cinemas. Yeah, and it was really good. Saoirse Ronan.
that is 100% a Montgomery Cinemas kind of movie, too,
Yeah,
for
and it
sure.
was it was in yeah, and it was in the big theater, and I think it was there for at least 2 months.
hmm I could definitely see the older clientele of Montgomery flooding out to go see Brooklyn.
Hmm.
Honestly, it reminds me of my grandparents a lot because my grandfather was an Italian American and my grandmother was like English, Irish, and Scottish, and I'm like, it just hits a little bit different. But alrighty, so let's dive into Taxi Driver though, and I think it's an interesting place to start is like the setting of New York City. I just find it so like Scorsese just does an amazing job of like the smoke, the the dirt, the grime, like you could just feel it so much in terms of the city. And it's such a perfect setting because 70s New York City was not a great place. And it would be the kind of place where somebody like Travis would, built up all of this like frustration and stuff like that. And all the to his words the filth that needs to be washed away. But Griff, how what are your thoughts on how Scorsese leveraged the city for the story?
Well, when I first saw Taxi Driver, I think I rented it from Hollywood Video to tell you the
Nice.
truth. And I've never seen a movie like that before. And what I mean by that is, I never saw a movie before that was so gritty. You felt the scumminess and the sliminess of the city. The only other movie about New York before that I could think of is perhaps Mean Streets, also directed by
Also,
Scorsese,
yep.
which also featured De Niro and Harvey Keitel. I
Mhm.
mean, it had that Mean Streets had that grittiness and sliminess, but nowhere near the same level as Taxi Driver.
Well, and I think it's so important that so much of this movie takes place at night.
Yeah,
And when he's in his taxi cab and like, the porno theaters are open and the
right.
pimps are out and people are having sex in his cab and he has to clean it out afterwards. Just just the gross stuff. And it's so important for that to come to light. Like this movie's called Taxi Driver. Like we got to believe like this whole entire experience of him being in isolation and just dealing with the worst of the city and like even Martin Scorsese's character who pays him to just sit there so he could fantasize about murdering his wife and stuff like that. It's just like there's some like dark stuff that come out at night in this New York City setting for sure.
Yeah, originally Scorsese wasn't supposed to play that role. I forgot whom it was, but for whatever reason, the original actor couldn't make it, so Scorsese inserted himself in the movie at the last minute. It definitely worked.
But yeah, he gives great performance. He's unnerving and creepy, and it just really works for that character in that scene because that's exactly the emotion and feeling that the audience is supposed to be eliciting from it. It's just so eerie and uncomfortable. And oh, go ahead, Griff.
No, Scorsese told De Niro, you don't have to talk. But honestly, in that scene, De Niro didn't even need to talk. You could just evaluate his facial
Mhm.
expressions and his eyes. You could just tell he just wasn't having it.
No, and I think this is a nice segue into the directing because that scene is it's staged so well because like it keeps cutting back to Scorsese like really antsy like put it back on, put it back on, put it back on in the back seat and like you're getting these shots of basically De Niro's eyes and we're just seeing him processing this and like should I like get this guy out of my cab and drive the hell away? And what I think is so impressive is it's hard to make such a small, confined space really come to life in a film. And just the way that he navigates the taxi throughout all these scenes of like catching those reflections in the mirror or like either looking at Travis staring at the mirror or him looking in the mirror and seeing the people behind him even like that last scene of the film is so well shot and really impressive and it gives you like is this really happening is he seeing stuff and like it builds up that mystery and tension for sure.
Yeah, the ending definitely has many different interpretations. When De Niro did his interview with James Lipton on Inside the Actors Studio in 1999, De Niro said at the time that he and Scorsese were actually thinking of doing a sequel to Taxi Driver. Now,
Interesting.
how and why that didn't come to fruition, I don't know, but I'd still like to see it. And really, if Paul Schrader's still around, if he wrote a script.
Well, it's very interesting because I just from context, from reading books on Scorsese, this was a really bad time for him because he wound up making New York, New York, and it was really not well received. And he almost died of like drugs and stuff like that in the late
Right.
70s. And it was De Niro who kept pushing to get back to work because De Niro was the one who wanted to make a movie about Jake LaMotta
Mhm.
and kept pushing for them to make Raging Bull together. So I'm guessing like Driver kind of like took a back seat to Scorsese trying to do something bigger with like New York, New York, and then De Niro really pushing for something like uh Raging Bull, another New York film. I feel like it's certainly not the same kind of tone and everything, but like after Hours is that same kind of like capturing the seediness of New York City kind of vibe of a film that Scorsese did later in the 80s with that film. But there's some other moments in this film, like the big moment, like the climax, that whole
Yeah.
entire sequence with the blood and the prosthetics and like blowing limbs off and like it's so visceral and violent and Scorsese's not pulling any punches and then you just have that whole entire shot of him going like with all the blood and everything, and the camera pulling out over the whole entire scene as it goes out to the streets. It was masterful. I'm like, Scorsese knew exactly what he was doing. And to be honest, like, this is his first 10 years of filmmaking, and this is one of his biggest films up to this point, and he was swinging for the fences with some really interesting directorial choices.
Mhm, and that was the scene that was gonna brand it an X-rated movie, and then, after many arguments, confrontations, we toned down the color of the blood to make it R. In fact, I found out recently that there was a story he was actually gonna go to an executive and, point a gun at him or something and steal the original cut. There's a clip of the new Apple TV documentary about Scorsese where he tells his daughter
Yeah.
that.
Oh my. Which, yes, Griff and I and our friends are very excited for Mr. Scorsese, the new documentary series coming to Apple TV Plus this fall. So we'll definitely be tuning in when we get a chance. But like, there's so many great, I guess, Griff, are there particular moments that really stood out to you from Scorsese's direction or like the cinematography and stuff like that?
Definitely the opening where it's very gritty. There's smoke everywhere. The cab comes out and the music's very ominous. The great Bernard Herrmann
Yes.
composed it, but then all of a sudden, it goes from an ominous score to a jazzy score. Almost like noir. Neo noir,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Well, and that's a great point too, was another big talking point is Bernard Herrmann's score, because like he goes hard. And you do have those big jazzy noirish kind of moments that really stand out. That sax going,
Yes.
really going for that saxophone. But there are those like it's more atmospheric kind of noise, and it's just like and these tones that right at the beginning with the taxi cab going through the smoke, and at the end that whole entire shot of the camera pulling through that building, you just have that tense music as well. And um it was such an interesting experience that was so haunting and unnerving at times with the music, and then others where it's just like it's cool. And it really captures that like 70s kind of vibe and really matches well with the setting of the film too. It's funny because I have a playlist on my Spotify called Is This Batman? Because every time I listen to a movie score, just guesses if it's Batman or not.
Yeah.
Um, and I recently, because what I usually do at work is I take my break is I sit and read a book, and I have movie scores in the background because I don't like silence. And so much of this score from Taxi Driver has been popping up recently, and it's great music. Just like all that jazzy kind of music really works well and everything. But like it really just does capture the feel of this film, and there's so many like to the point of like the taxi cab sequences that are so confined and claustrophobic. There's a lot of scenes of Travis just in his apartment and how Scorsese like captures him doing his workout or doing these things, writing his letters, writing his thoughts down and stuff like that. And all the like the montages of him working out and just how the camera moves within his apartment's really effective and interesting too.
Yeah, yeah, trying to do anything he can to improve himself, because his world is so insulated and, the apartment's, dilapidated and,
Mhm.
just so much, negativity and, depression surrounding that.
Exactly. And there's one particular shot that's really haunting to me that doesn't have any violence, but it's like the threat of violence. It's a scene where he's buying the guns and the guy's like showing him off, and he just like hands the magnum over and it's cutting across the windows. And
Right.
then the camera like focuses down and you see that he's like pointing at people.
Hmm.
And it's a simple camera movement, but it's just so haunting because it's like you shouldn't be like practicing with a gun and pointing at like people. but that's really setting up. It's like this is what we need to be worried about watching this film and what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Because this film is unnerving and doesn't pull punches. And a big part of it that does give it a very noirish feel on top of some of that like jazzier type of music is the voiceover. So, what are some of your thoughts on how Scorsese leveraged that voiceover for the film?
It was definitely an important part because it really took you inside the mind of Travis Bickle. And I know that Taxi Driver is definitely one of the most influential films at that time, but there were movies that influenced Taxi Driver,
Yeah.
particularly The Searchers. You know, John
Mhm.
Wayne goes to rescue Natalie Wood, Robert De Niro goes to rescue Jodie Foster. And in fact,
Mhm.
the Harvey Keitel's character was apparently based off the villain in The Searchers, Chief Cigar. In fact, if you notice in Taxi Driver, Keitel had that American Indian head wrap around his head.
Yep.
Apparently, it was a nod to Chief Cigar from The Searchers.
That's interesting because I know The Searchers is one of Scorsese's like five favorite films, and I'm
Yeah,
a huge fan of The Searchers as
same.
well. And very interestingly, that was last month's episode. Um, this podcast was Patrice, my friend Patrice and I talking about The Searchers. So this is very fitting. But I never thought about that narrative parallel, but that makes so much sense in terms of that kind of experience. But also reinforcing on that, there's so many noirs, obviously, that have set this like the voiceover and like talking out the thoughts and everything. But this is so much more uncomfortable because I don't think many people want to be in the head of somebody as unstable as Travis Bickle, and it's honestly really uncomfortable and unnerving listening to this very angry, isolated kind of experience of just listening to what's going on in his head, and you're left with the information that he's a Vietnam vet, but it doesn't like outside of him being like my my body has gotten soft and flabby. I'm like, I need to get back into shape. And you're like seeing him like with his arm on the like over a flame and all this
Yeah, that
working
was
out.
horrific.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. And that kind of regimented life of a soldier and like he starts wearing like military looking garb and stuff like that. And it's so important that I feel like this is a very 70s film. It's very important that this is post Vietnam and we don't know what happened to him and all the like PTSD that he potentially could have that he came back with. And we're like stuck in his head, which is so uncomfortable. And that obviously became a trademark of Scorsese's films because you got this, you got Goodfellas, you got Casino. So many of his films have that voiceover. And even like Wolf of Wall Street, where it's just like some of these people, like, I don't want to be anywhere near your head. And that's what's so interesting and unnerving about this experience.
Yeah, just Paul Schrader, when he wrote it, he specifically chose Vietnam because he knew about all the trauma that came along with that war. So he wanted it to be applicable to Travis Bickle.
Which makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because Paul Schrader makes a lot of antisocial outcast kinds of protagonists that go through some really uncomfortable experiences. Like he wrote on Raging Bull too. And Jake LaMotta certainly isn't socially aware
No.
or like good with people, or even something like First Reformed and stuff like that, where you have these very isolated protagonists that are going on these journeys. And I think that's an interesting motif that Paul Schrader really digs into. But I know we've got talked a little bit about inside the head of Travis, but like he's an uncomfortable protagonist to follow around in this film because like he's fully committed to his work for sure. And he's somebody who obviously doesn't connect well with women, especially. Like the whole entire experience with him and Betsy is so uncomfortable
Yeah, the scene where, she's just walking and, she's wearing that white dress, she's like a bright light for him. And then,
Hmm.
he screws it up along the way. Yeah, and then it goes over to Jodie Foster, that character. Yeah, that was a crazy transition.
Well, and because you have this experience where he's trying to connect, because like what's the most common way that people connect into society is, living the dream of getting married and getting a family. And this is him like pushing himself into his this uncomfortable zone of trying to court a woman. And one, he's stalking her. He's just sitting outside this voting place, just staring, this campaign headquarters, just like staring at her from his taxi. And then, of course, they go on this date, and their coffee and pie little date seemed like it went okay. And he's like, he doesn't seem so bad. And then he takes her to a porno show and doesn't understand why a woman might not want to go to a porno show for a date, and just that disconnect. And then unfortunately he lashes out.
Mhm.
And god, when he showed up to that campaign place and then like threatened to fight Albert Brooks towards the end, there it's just like all of those things, it's so uncomfortable, and it puts us, the audience, who's in his head, in such an uncomfortable place.
Yeah, originally Albert Brooks was supposed to play Harvey Keitel's character, and Harvey Keitel was to play Albert Brooks's character. I didn't know that early on.
Like I could see Harvey Keitel being this guy trying to schmooze Betsy and stuff like that, but well, I can see Albert Brooks playing a villain because like he's fantastic in the movie Drive,
Yeah, I
and he's
was
so
gonna.
into. No, go ahead, Griff.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say. I mean, Brooks definitely showed off his villainous chops decades later in the Ryan Gosling movie Drive.
Oh my god, and he's so good in it. I know he got a Golden Globe nomination, but he definitely should have got. I would have been happy if he got an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor for that movie, but I don't know if I could see him as Sport though. Like that's such a weird offbeat kind of character. Like I wouldn't have been able to take it seriously if Albert Brooks was acting like a pimp,
Yeah,
to be
I don't.
frank.
Yeah, I don't think he would have brought the same sliminess to the role like Keitel did.
No, Keitel ate that up and it's so uncomfortable. It is so uncomfortable watching him. But I think one of the most important pieces to this whole film working is De Niro, because it's so interesting, because what do we think of De Niro now as an actor is a lot of these like gangster roles and stuff like that where he's intimidating and like in a powerful way, like
Right.
Al Capone in The Untouchables, which we got to talk about,
Yeah.
or like so many of these other gangster movies. But like he is scary in this, but in a completely different way, because you're not quite sure like we know what's going on in Travis's head because we hear it, but I can't imagine anybody around him knows what's going on with him because he's so uncomfortable and awkward. And De Niro sells that so perfectly in this.
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone else playing him. In fact, apparently he wasn't the first choice. Dustin Hoffman read the script and he turned it down, calling Scorsese crazy. And Al Pacino was considered. Even Jeff Bridges was considered.
Like I know Dustin Hoffman would have committed to the role, but I don't know. I feel like it would have been a little too manic, and that's not what Travis is supposed to be. I think Pacino could have done something interesting with it.
Yeah.
Because this was still before he went like to like a million with all performances and just humongous with it. Jeff Bridges, wow. I would have to see it to like that would be very interesting. You know who I think would be a really interesting Travis Bickle now is Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, definitely. And in fact, going back to what I was saying earlier about Taxi Driver being so influential, you watch Joker, and there's definitely a lot of elements, not only from Taxi Driver, but another De Niro Scorsese collaboration, The King of Comedy.
Oh my God, Rupert Pupkin is so uncomfortable as a character in such a different way than Travis Bickle is. Just like his mustache and him always being like
Yeah.
so like uncomfortably like I'm so happy and joyful. It's like "Mm, fine, I'll sit here
Yeah,
and
and
just
just
being
and just like with Travis Bickle, he's in his own little world, his own fantasy.
yeah. Well, and that's the interesting thing because Rupert is in such this like glorified fantasy. I feel like Travis is in some kind of nightmare all
Mm,
the time, and it's really uncomfortable. But De Niro does everything so well. Like you brought up like his facial expressions, like they're excellent. There's so much that he's able to do with his eyes and his body language, and it's really uncomfortable seeing his body language change towards the end of the film. Like when we first see him with the mohawk and at that event for Palantine, something just so uncomfortable about that whole like his whole energy that he's bringing, or like that scene where he's asking all those questions to the Secret
Secret Service.
Service guy. That scene's so uncomfortable, Griff. And Robert De Niro is so like suspicious and awkward. And like, I'm not surprised that Secret Service was like immediately like, we need to follow this guy. Like,
Yeah.
go, go, go. And just all those kinds of things. But I guess, Griff, who are some of the other standouts? I know we've dabbled into talking about some of the other actors, but who are some of your supporting standouts for the film?
Yeah, I think aside from Sybil Shepherd, Peter Boyle was definitely a great addition to the movie. Trying to help Travis Bickle, guide his way through, not just being a taxi driver, but just life in general.
I He was so good in that scene where he's trying to mentor him
Yeah.
outside of the diner. And on some level, I wish that he could have gotten across to Travis. And maybe like if he would have like cracked through, maybe Travis would have been in a different place. But like I think that's a challenging thing is Travis is in like a really bad place. And I think he needs a lot more help than just, a nice taxi driver who's willing to mentor him. But Peter Boyle's so good in
Mhm.
that scene. I love him so much. I grew up watching Everybody Loves Raymond and him being Frank Barone and just being such a cranky old guy was so perfect. And he's great in Young Frankenstein as well, but this is a really great supporting role for him to stand out in. Obviously, the biggest thing is Jodie Foster.
Mm.
Um, because what was she, 14 in
Yeah,
this?
I think
Something like
yeah,
that?
yeah, I think she was around the age of her character 12, 13, 14, and yeah, there was a lot of controversy there, and then of course later on with what happened with Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Don't watch movies and try to replicate the stuff that happens in them, people. But like Jodie Foster is so good in this film, and because she got nominated for an Oscar for this, right?
Right.
What she deserved, because like she is acting well beyond her years. And what's interesting is she did that in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which was another Scorsese film a couple of years earlier with Ellen Bernstein and Chris Christopherson. But like Jodie Foster has been an amazing actor since she was a child. And there's something here, like this isn't just like a kid performance. This feels like an act, like a really substantive performance. And it's important to remember that she's a child to so many sick, disgusting things. And like the fact that she is 14 really pushes the boundaries of those scenes where she's with Harvey Keitel. Like that one in the apartment, just the two of them, is just so uncomfortable to watch, realizing like Keitel's probably like a 30 something year old man pushing 40 at this point, and just that whole entire dynamic. But Jodie Foster's so incredible in this film.
Yeah, she definitely, holds her own, with Keitel and De Niro.
hmm And I love Albert Brooks. It's so funny because this is probably well, that's a lie. Probably the first thing I've seen Albert Brooks in was Finding Nemo. But like I didn't know who Albert Brooks was at the point, but like this is probably the first like live action acting performance I saw his. And it's such like, oh, he's like the comic relief. He's super awkward and stuff like that. But like having seen Broadcast News, Drive, and then all of his films like Real Life and Defending Your Life and films like that. I love Albert Brooks. I think he's absolutely incredible. He's also absolutely hilarious. And that was such an inspired choice having him as this like comic relief other guy that's totally flirting with Betsy the whole entire time, but like she barely pays attention to any of his flirtations because he's just like a nerd.
Yeah, if the first movie I ever saw him in was Mother with Debbie Reynolds. I actually rented the
Same.
videotape from
Nice.
Blockbuster. And yeah, I almost forgot about Finding Nemo as well as Drive. And yeah, I've heard of Defending Your Life. That HBO Max documentary that came out about him 2 years ago, I didn't realize the impact that he had on stand-up comedy, especially among the writers.
Exactly. I had no idea about that either, and I also didn't know how deep of a connection he had to the Reiners. Like him and Rob Reiner were best friends. Also
Right.
finding out that his real name's Albert Einstein. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was shocked to hear that too.
He's like, well, I couldn't go into show business named Albert Einstein. And and the fact that Carl Reiner, when asked on a late show, asked who's the funniest person you know, and he's like a 16-year-old kid named Albert Einstein. And like Carl Reiner said
Mm,
that a teenage Albert Brooks was the funniest man he's ever met. And he worked with Mel Brooks. So like that's incredible. And he had a big role in this film, but I think he's an important role because I think it's important to have that contrast of like this antisocial, disconnected, isolated man, and then like the regular guy that just shows up to work every day and that dichotomy that Betsy's kind of stuck between. And yeah, I think Sybil Shepherd does a really good job here as well. And like she has to deal with some really uncomfortable moments for sure. And like that whole entire date, both of them sell that so perfectly on both sides of that experience for sure. But I think a big thing here is thinking about really the messaging and what this film is trying to say. And I think Scorsese is really putting like a mirror up to people and society of like, we have people like Travis Bickle walking around every day. And it's just like, what are we doing about it? Like allowing people to be so isolated and disconnected to the point where it breeds violence and antisocial behavior. And I think it's important, like that connection to Vietnam and thinking about like what we did with our veterans when they got home. Because whether it's this or First Blood or so many other films showing that.
yeah, coming home with John Voight and Jane
Mhm.
Fonda and Bruce Dern. And also keep in mind, this was during a time where you had no internet, you had no social media, no smartphones, none of that. This was the way before that. So yeah, I'm sure it was, just as, difficult, if not worse in those days, the late 70s and 80s.
Like it's not like you could just text your friend when you're feeling lonely and stuff like that. And the fact that like he gets a job being a taxi driver where like he's up all night, he's isolated and dealing with like the worst possible people a lot of the time in New York City. And it's interesting because like I've seen other films, like there's a film Daddio that had Sean Penn and Dakota Johnson that came out
Yeah, I
recently where
remember
he's
that.
he's a taxi driver and he is not antisocial. He is like obnoxiously that kind of taxi driver that just wants to
Yeah,
talk to you the whole entire time.
right,
And that kind of dynamic, but like this is so uncomfortable. And or Deer Hunter was another film dealing
right.
with coming back from Vietnam. And what's crazy is this is right after Vietnam ended. Like right after it ended. And this was before any of those other films. And I know this film doesn't put the Vietnam aspect right in front, but it's introduced within like the first scene where we get to meet Travis talking to, oh, I forget what is the Italian American character actor that was in Rocky and The Godfather that runs the taxi depot.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I forgot his name.
Oh, Joe Spinell. And they're sitting there and like their whole entire interaction of talking about like, yeah, I was in Vietnam, I was a Marine. And like becoming a Marine is a very traumatic experience and all the things that you have to go through to prepare for that kind of experience. And like there's no like he's not going to a VA or anything like that for help or anything. He's just living in his own head. And very few people are shooting lifelines out. And that I think that's what why that scene with Wizard is so important because somebody is throwing a lifeline out to him and he's desperately trying to get across to Travis, and Travis just like, what are you talking about? And like being completely confused about that. And the fact that all he does is sit at home and like that whole entire montage of like, that montage of the like, you talking to me? That whole sequence is so uncomfortable because it's like this who's this guy have to talk to? He's just like talking to himself in this mirror and having these fantasies about being a hero and stuff like that. And who's he interacting with by the end of the film? Uh he's interacting with a pimp, a 14-year-old sex worker, and stuff like these are his connections to society. And I feel like Travis would probably be sitting on like 4chan and like the darkest depths of the internet today. And
Yeah,
like that's
yeah,
the
somebody
kind of
like him.
yeah, and it's uncomfortable to think about. It's like, where did things go wrong for him? Why didn't nobody there to get help? And I think it's so uncomfortable by the end that like he goes in and guns down all these people, and the ending is like propping him up as this like cult hero and stuff like that. And it's just like it shows how little that we know of the people that like are plastered all over the news. It's like, isn't the kind of person that we should be like cheering on and rooting for? It's like this is a really disturbed individual. And now you just reinforce him with a hero complex because you just made him into a hero.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and like we were saying earlier, it's all up for interpretation. Like, was that really his dying dream or whatever?
Well, and that's the interesting thing because like was that his fever dream as he's sitting there on that couch bleeding out and dying? Or like did this really happen or did he actually get through it but then he imagines Betsy popping up, which like I wouldn't put it past him because like he obviously is not mentally well
Right.
and like those kinds of things. And like if it is all true and she really did come back because she's interested now that he's a hero, he's the same person. He's the same person that took you to a porno show. He's the same person that like made you feel uncomfortable. It's just you throw that title on, and I think that's really what Scorsese's trying to do, and just being like, we live our lives and don't even think about the people like this
Hmm.
that are in our cities or right around the corner, and like who's helping them and trying to put them on the right path. I think it's important that we don't have a lot more backstory on Travis, but I would imagine his backstory would be pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting how he doesn't talk about, what he went through during that time because I think it's meant to make the audience think about it more.
Mhm. And that who said it? Oh, I was listening to the Cinephiles, my favorite podcast. Love that. Highly recommend Griff if you've never heard of the Cinephiles or anybody out there who loves movies. But I think it was Steve Morris, one of the hosts, mentioned like every great movie's a mystery. If a film is making you think about what's going to happen next, I don't know what's going to happen next. That's a mystery. And we want to know if we're engaged. This film leaves enough blanks of like his past and his upbringing that it makes us think it's like, how did he get here?
Mm.
And it's more unnerving that we don't know and that we just hear whatever's going on in his head. But I guess, Griff, were there any other scenes in the film that really stood out to you?
Well, going back to when he was buying the guns, there was actually one weapon inaccuracy of it, being a weapons historian. I had to
Mm,
point this one out when the seller tells, Bickle, oh, the Walther PPK replaced the P-38. That actually wasn't the case during World War II. While the Walther P-38 was the standard sidearm of the German military, the Walther PPK, which actually later became famous as James Bond's
Bond, yes.
sidearm, it existed, but among the officers, German military
Infantry.
officers. So they were both. They both served the Germans during World War II, kind of hand in hand.
That's a very interesting point. Uh, I guess that guy needs to brush up on his gun history before he
Yeah,
starts trying to sell guns off to people.
yeah. I just think the audience may have missed her. They just didn't care.
Well, I don't think most audience members are going to think about that. And
Nah.
also, I don't think Travis was thinking too hard about that. He went in there knowing he was going to buy some guns.
Right.
That guy found the right customer that day because how much did he spend? Like $1,000 on all those guns or something like that.
Yeah. Like one of them was 250, the other was 350, and yeah, something like that. Yeah, but probably close to $1,000 if that.
But like some of the top scenes for me, it's like obviously the iconic whole like montage thing of like him really breaking and doing like the whole "you talking to me? There's nobody here." Just the way that De Niro sells that scene so perfectly, and then the climax of the film is thrilling. It's unnerving. Um, it's brutal, and it really fits the film and is really impactful in that way. And I think one of my other I really love that scene between Wizard and Travis because it's like that's one of the few hopeful scenes in the film,
Hmm.
and it's a sad thing that he walked away from that conversation not getting anything from
Right.
that conversation because he could have used it. But I guess Griff, wrapping things up, I thought I had a fun question for us to answer. So obviously Scorsese's been doing films for like 6 decades at this point, and he's still making movies. But Griff, what kind of film would you want to see Scorsese's like say his last film? What would you want to see from him?
I don't know if Scorsese's still gonna do it, but I know he was planning on making a movie about Theodore Roosevelt based upon two books that were written by this guy Edmund Morris, Colonel Roosevelt and Theodore Rex, and Leo DiCaprio was supposed to play Roosevelt. I'm still hoping he'll do it. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition, but I'm hoping if not the last movie Scorsese directs, it'll be one of the last.
I I saw that that was something in like because like Scorsese still has like looking at his upcoming projects, he has like 12 of them. There have been so many things announced and stuff like that. Roosevelt is on there as
Mm.
one of the ones that was announced, which is interesting because it looks like A Life of Jesus is probably going to be that next film that he's working on. There was even like the Grateful Dead they were talking about. One that I really wish he would get around to doing is The Devil in the White City.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah, well, again, another future collaboration with DiCaprio.
Yeah, and at one point Keanu Reeves was involved too, because there's two main characters. It's H. Holmes, the serial killer, and then like the investigator and stuff like that. And I it got switched over to being like a Hulu series with Keanu in it, and then that fell apart. I'm just like, I read the book, and it's such a fascinating, terrifying true crime story that I think it would be really fascinating to see Scorsese's spin on it. I think I know what Jess's pick would be is because he has the rights to The Wager, a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. which I got
Okay.
that for Jess as an audiobook, and my wife sure does love shipwrecks.
Oh, so it's all about a the shipwreck and the aftermath of the shipwreck.
Yeah, so the British naval ship the Wager is wrecked on a desolate island off the tip of South America in 1740.
Hmm,
So it is a nonfiction book from the same writer, David Gran of Killers of the Flower Moon.
interesting.
Yeah. So I'm sure that would have been Jess's answer to this question, like 100%. And
Yeah.
Leo's supposed to be attached to that because, Leo's attached to every one of these damn movies.
Mm.
It's like whichever one actually gets made. Uh, but Griff, I appreciate you as always for coming on and wanting to chat some movies with me.
Yes, thank you, Shane. Great as always.
I don't know when the next time I'll have another Scorsese film is. I have to double check my ranking list of when that is, but obviously it's always great talking about a legendary filmmaker like Scorsese, and I love Taxi Driver and gave me an excuse to rewatch it. But next month, a little bit of a different kind of film, a little bit of a different pace. My friend Mike Hilty, our fearless leader of the SPM Crew Podcasting Network, is going to be coming on to talk about Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which
Nice.
I am such a huge Terminator fan, and I can't wait to talk. One, can't wait to rewatch Judgment Day, and then two, talk about it with Mike. There'll be some interesting films coming our way with The Princess Bride, Sunset Boulevard, Skyfall, Ex Machina, What We Do in the Shadows, all kinds of different fun coming up over the next couple months. But thank all of you for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this episode. What's your favorite Scorsese film? What's your favorite De Niro performance? Those are some big questions to throw out there for sure. A lot of things to choose from. I'm sure it's not Fearless Leader from the Rocky and Bullwinkle movie, but I do remember seeing that, and Robert De Niro hammed it up just for just to mention. Speaking of Fearless Leaders, and make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. The SPDM Crew Podcasting Network is ever expanding. There's so many great shows of all different types of interests. I'm sure you can find something, and if you love movies, we got plenty of that here. And if you want to become a guest on one of our shows, like this one or some of my other ones or any of the other podcasts, or if you even want to start your own podcast, make sure to reach out to us on our website, the SPDM Crew. And if you like our logo, I'm going to gush over this again. This is my favorite logo of all of mine. And it's from our buddy Joe. And he does such a great job. He does a lot of fun stuff on Etsy, so you should check out his Etsy. And he does a lot of great stuff on Joey he Cartoon P. He had his old YouTube channel. He does a lot of great art on Instagram as well. But most importantly, thank all of you for always tuning in and supporting the Wasteland Vintage Roadshow here on the SPDM Crew Podcasting Network.